Welcome back to Stories and Tea with Mrs. Straka. This is a new teacup, by the way. It is from Japan. It's a lidded teacup. It's one I've actually looked for a while. It's a double-walled one. I finally found one, and I'm very happy about it. One more sip, and we'll get started. All right. Dr. Dolittle, the 5th chapter. Polynesia. I think your house is the most interesting house I was ever in, I said as we set off in the direction of town. May I come and see you again tomorrow? Certainly, said the doctor. Come any day you like. Tomorrow I'll show you the garden and my private zoo. Oh, you have a zoo? I asked. Oh yes, said he. The larger animals are too big for the house, so I keep them in a zoo in the garden. It's not a very big collection, but it is an interesting one in its way. It must be splendid, I said, to be able to talk all the languages of different animals. Do you ever think I could learn to do it? Oh, surely, said the doctor, with practice. You have to be very patient, you know. You really ought to have Polynesia start you. It was she who gave me my first lessons. Who is Polynesia? I asked. Polynesia was a West African parrot I had. She isn't with me any more now, said the doctor sadly. Oh, why? Is she dead? Oh, no, said the doctor. She's still living. I hope. When we reached Africa, she was so glad to be back in her own country, she wept for joy, and when the time came for me to come back here, I had not the heart to take her away from that sunny land, although it is true she did offer to come. I left her in Africa. Ah, well, I have missed her terribly. She wept again when we left, but I think I did the right thing. She was one of the best friends I ever had. It was she who first gave me the idea of learning the animal language and becoming an animal doctor. I often wonder if she remained happy in Africa, whether I shall ever see her funny old solemn face again. Good old Polynesia. A most extraordinary bird. Well, well. Just at that moment, we heard the noise of someone running behind us, and turning around, we saw Jip the dog rushing down the road after us as fast as his legs could bring him. He seemed very excited about something, and as soon as he came up to us, he started barking and whining to the doctor in a peculiar way. Then the doctor too seemed to get all worked up and began talking and making queer signs to the dog. At length, he turned to me, his face shining with happiness. Polynesia's come back, he cried. Imagine it! Jip says she's just arrived at the house. My, and it's 5 years since I last saw her. Excuse me a minute. He turned as if to go back home, but the parrot, Polynesia, was already flying towards us. The doctor clapped his hands like a child getting a new toy, while the swarm of sparrows in the roadway fluttered, gossiping up onto the fences, highly scandalized to see a gray and scarlet parrot skimming down an English lane. On she came, straight onto the doctor's shoulder, where she immediately began talking a steady stream in a language I could not understand. She seemed to have a terrible lot to say, and very soon the doctor had forgotten all about me and my squirrel and Jip and everything else, till at length the bird clearly asked him something about me. Oh, excuse me, Stubbins, said the doctor. I was so interested listening to my old friend here. We must get on and see this squirrel of yours. Polynesia, this is Thomas Stubbins. The parrot on the doctor's shoulder nodded gravely towards me, and then, to my great surprise, said quite plainly in English, How do you do? I remember the night you were born. It was a terribly cold winter. You were a very ugly baby. Stubbins is anxious to learn animal language, said the doctor. I was just telling him about you and the lessons you gave me when Jip ran up and told us you had arrived. Well, said the parrot, turning to me, I may have started the doctor learning, but I never could have done even that if he hadn't first taught me to understand what I was saying when I spoke English. You see, many parrots can talk like a person, but very few of them understand what they're saying. They just say it because, well, they fancy it's smart, or they know they'll have crackers given to them. By this time we had turned, and were going towards my home, with Jip running in front, and Polynesia still perched on the doctor's shoulder. The bird chattered incessantly, mostly about Africa, but now she spoke in English, out of politeness to me. How is Prince Bumpo getting on? Asked the doctor. Oh, I'm glad you asked me, said Polynesia. I almost forgot to tell you. What do you think? Bumpo is in England. In England? You don't say, cried the doctor. What on earth is he doing here? His father, the king, sent him here to a place called, Bulford, I think it was, to study lessons. Bulford? Bulford? Muttered the doctor. I've never heard of the place. Oh, you mean Oxford? Oh, yes, that's the place, Oxford, said Polynesia. I knew it had cattle in the name somewhere. Oxford, that's the place he's gone to. Well, well, murmured the doctor. Fancy Bumpo studying at Oxford. Well, well. There were great doings in Jolliginki when he left. He was scared to death to leave home. He was the first man from their country to go abroad, you know. But his father made him come. He said that all kings are sending their sons to Oxford now. It's the fashion, and Bumpo would have to go. Bumpo wanted to bring his wives with him, but the king wouldn't let him do that either. Poor Bumpo went off in tears, and everybody in the palace was crying too. You've never heard such a hullabaloo. Do you know if he ever went back in search of the Sleeping Beauty? Asked the doctor. Oh, yes, said Polynesia. The day after you left. And a good thing for him he did. The king got to know about his helping you to escape, and he was dreadfully wild about it. Quick pause for a second. What they're referring to is from a different story of Dr. Dolittle. It's the Africa voyage when he goes down there. I'm not going to spoil the story, but Bumpo, who is the crown prince of Joliginki, helps the doctor to escape from prison because his father has imprisoned Dr. Dolittle, and so that's what they're talking about with all of that. This is a previous character that they know. Tommy doesn't know him, obviously, but everybody else does. Anyways, back in. And how is Chi-Chi getting on? Chi-Chi, added the doctor in explanation to me, was a pet monkey I had years ago. I left him in Africa too when I came away. Well, said Polynesia, frowning, Chi-Chi's not entirely happy. I saw a good deal of him the last few years. He got dreadfully homesick for you and the house and the garden. It's funny, but I was just the same way myself. You remember how crazy I was to get back to the dear old land? And Africa is a wonderful country. I don't care what anybody says. Though some don't like the sand. Well, I thought I was going to have a perfectly grand time, but somehow, I don't know, after a few weeks it seemed to get tiresome. I just couldn't seem to settle down. Well, to make the long story short, one night I made up my mind I'd come back here and find you. So I hunted up old Chi-Chi and told him about it. He said he didn't blame me a bit, felt exactly the same way himself. Africa was so deadly quiet after the life we led with you. He missed the stories you used to tell out of your animal books, and the chats we used to have sitting round the kitchen fire on winter nights. The animals out there are very nice to us and all that, but somehow the dear kind creatures seemed a bit stupid. Chi-Chi said he had noticed it too, but I suppose it wasn't they who had changed. It was us who were different. When I left, poor old Chi-Chi broke down and cried. He said he felt as though his only friend were leaving him, though, as you know, he has simply millions of relatives there. He said it didn't seem fair that I should have wings to fly over here any time I liked, and with him no way to follow me. But mark my words, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he found a way to come some day. He's a smart lad, is Chi-Chi. At this point, we arrived at my home. My father's shop was closed and the shutters were up, but my mother was standing at the door, looking down the street. Good evening, Mrs. Stubbins, said the doctor. It is my fault that your son is so late. I made him stay to supper while his clothes were drying. He was soaked to the skin, so was I. We ran into one another in the storm, and I insisted on his coming into my house for shelter. I was beginning to get worried about him, said my mother. I'm thankful to you, sir, for looking after him so well and bringing him home. Oh, don't mention it, said the doctor. We've had a very interesting chat. Who might it be that I have the honour of addressing? Asked my mother, staring at the grey parrot perched on his shoulder. Oh, I'm John Dolittle. I dare say your husband will remember me. He made me some very excellent boots about 4 years ago. They really are splendid, added the doctor, gazing down at his feet with great satisfaction. The doctor has come to cure my squirrel, mother, said I. He knows all about animals. Oh, no, said the doctor. Not all, Stubbins. Not all about them, by any means. It's very kind of you to come so far to look after his pet, said my mother. Tom is always bringing home strange creatures from the woods and fields. Is he? Said the doctor. Perhaps he will grow up to be a naturalist some day. Who knows? Won't you come in? Asked my mother. The place is a little untidy because I haven't finished spring cleaning yet, but there's a nice fire burning in the parlour. Thank you, said the doctor. What a charming home you have. And after wiping his enormous boots very, very carefully on the mat, the great man passed into the house. The 6th chapter, The Wounded Squirrel. Inside, we found my father busy practicing on the flute beside the fire. This he always did every evening after his work was over. The doctor immediately began talking to him about flutes and piccolos and bassoons, and presently my father said, Perhaps you perform upon the flute yourself, sir. Why don't you play us a tune? Well, said the doctor, it is a long time since I touched the instrument, but I would like to try, may I? Then the doctor took the flute from my father and played and played and played. It was wonderful. My mother and father sat as still as statues, staring up at the ceiling as though they were in church, and even I, who didn't bother much about music except on the mouth organ, even I felt all sad and cold and creepy and wished that I had been a better boy. Oh, I think that was just beautiful, sighed my mother when at length the doctor stopped. You are a great musician, sir, said my father. A very great musician. Won't you please play us something else? Why, certainly, said the doctor. Oh, but look here, I forgot all about the squirrel. I'll show him to you, I said. He's upstairs in my room. So I led the doctor to my bedroom at the top of the house and showed him the squirrel in the packing case filled with straw. The animal, who had always seemed very much afraid of me, though I had tried hard to make him feel at home, sat up at once when the doctor came into the room and started to chatter. The doctor chattered back in the same way, and the squirrel, when he was lifted up to have his leg examined, appeared to be rather pleased than frightened. I held the candle while the doctor tied the leg up in what he called splints, which he made out of matchsticks with his penknife. "I think you will find that his leg will get better now in a very short time," said the doctor, closing up his bag. "Don't let him run about for at least 2 weeks yet, but keep him in the open air and cover him up with dry leaves if the nights get cool. He tells me he's rather lonely here, all by himself, and is wondering how his wife and children are getting on. I have assured him that you are a man to be trusted, and I will send a squirrel who lives in my garden to find out how his family are and to bring him news of them. He must be kept cheerful at all costs. Squirrels are naturally a very cheerful and active race. It is hard for them to lie still doing nothing, but you needn't worry about him. He'll be all right." Then we went back again to the parlor, and my mother and father kept him playing the flute till after 10 o'clock. Although my parents both liked the doctor tremendously from the first moment they saw him, and were very proud to have him come and play to us, for we really were terribly poor, they did not realize then what a truly great man he was one day to become. Of course, now, when almost everyone in the whole world has heard about Dr. Dolittle and his books, if you were to go to that little house in Puddleby where my father had his cobbler shop, you would see set in the wall over the old-fashioned door a stone with writing on it which says, "John Dolittle, the famous naturalist, played the flute in this house in the year 1839. I often look back upon that night, long, long ago, and if I close my eyes and think hard, I can see that parlor just as it was then. A funny little man in coattails with a round, kind face playing away on the flute in front of the fire, my mother on one side of him, and my father on the other, holding their breath and listening with their eyes shut. Myself with Jip squatting on the carpet at his feet, staring into the coals, and Polynesia perched on the mantelpiece beside his shabby high hat, gravely swinging her head from side to side in time to the music. I see it all, just as though it were before me now. And then I remember how, after we'd seen the doctor out at the front door, we all came back into the parlor and talked about him till it was still later. And even after I did go to bed, I had never stayed up so late in my life before. I dreamed about him and a band of strange, clever animals that played flutes and fiddles and drums the whole night through. Chapter, Shellfish Talk. The next morning, although I had gone to bed so late the night before, I was up frightfully early. The first sparrows were just beginning to chirp sleepily on the slates outside my attic window when I jumped out of bed and scrambled into my clothes. I could hardly wait to get back to the little house with the big garden, to see the doctor in his private zoo. For the first time in my life, I forgot all about breakfast, and creeping down the stairs on tiptoe so as not to wake my mother and father, I opened the front door and popped out into the empty, silent street. When I got to the doctor's gate, I suddenly thought that perhaps it was too early to call on anyone, and I began to wonder if the doctor would be up yet. I looked into the garden, and no one seemed to be about, so I opened the gate quietly and went inside. As I turned to the left to go down a path between some hedges, I heard a voice quite close to me saying, "Good morning! How early you are!" I turned around, and there, sitting on top of the private hedge, was the grey parrot, Polynesia. "Good morning," I said. "I suppose I'm rather early. Is the doctor still in bed?" "Oh, no," said Polynesia. "He's been up an hour and a half. You'll find him in the house somewhere. The front door is open. Just push it and go in. He's sure to be in the kitchen cooking breakfast or working in his study. Walk right in. I'm waiting to see the sun rise, but upon my word, I think it's forgotten to rise. It's an awful climate, this. Now, if we were in Africa, the world would be blazing in sunlight at this hour of the morning. Just see that mist rolling over those cabbages. It's enough to give you rheumatism to look at it. Beastly climate. Beastly. Really, I don't know why anything but frogs ever stay in England. Well, don't let me keep you. Run along and see the doctor." "Thank you," I said. "I'll go and look for him." When I opened the front door, I could smell bacon frying, so I made my way to the kitchen. There I discovered a large kettle boiling away over the fire, and some bacon and eggs in a dish upon the hearth. It seemed to me that the bacon was getting all dried up with the heat, so I pulled the dish a little further away from the fire and went on through the house, looking for the doctor. I found him at last in the study. I did not know then that it was called the study. It was certainly a very interesting room, with telescopes and microscopes and all sorts of other strange things which I did not understand about, but I wished I did. Hanging on the walls were pictures of animals and fishes and strange plants, and collections of birds' eggs and seashells were in glass cases. The doctor was standing at the main table in his dressing gown. At first I thought he was washing his face. He had a square glass box before him full of water, and he was holding one ear under the water while he covered the other with his left hand. As I came in, he stood up. "Ah, good morning, Stubbins," said he. "Going to be a nice day, don't you think? I've just been listening to the Whiff-Waff, but he's very disappointing. Very. Why? I said. Didn't you find that he has any language at all? Oh, yes, said the doctor. He has a language, but it's such a poor language, only a few words like yes and no, hot and cold. That's all he can say. It's very disappointing. You see, he really belongs to two different families of fishes. I thought he was going to be so tremendously helpful. Well, well. I suppose, said I, that means he hasn't very much sense, if his language is only 2 or 3 words. Yes, I suppose it does. Possibly it's the kind of life he leads. You see, they're very rare now, the Whiff-Waffs. Very rare and very solitary. They swim around in the deepest parts of the ocean, entirely by themselves, always alone, so I presume they don't really need to talk much. Perhaps some kind of bigger shellfish would talk more, I said. After all, he is very small, isn't he? Yes, said the doctor, that's true. Oh, I have no doubt that there are shellfish who are good talkers, not in the least doubt, but the big shellfish, the biggest of them, are so hard to catch. They're only to be found in the deep parts of the sea, and as they don't swim very much, just crawl along the floor of the ocean most of the time, they're very rarely taken in nets. I do wish I could find some way of going down to the bottom of the sea. I could learn a lot if only I could do that. But we are forgetting all about breakfast. Have you had breakfast yet, Stubbins? I told the doctor I'd forgotten all about it, and he at once led the way to the kitchen. Yes, he said as he poured the hot water from the kettle into the teapot. If a man could only manage to get right down to the bottom of the sea and live there for a while, he would discover some wonderful things that people have never dreamed of. But men do go down, don't they? I asked. Divers and people like that? Oh, yes, to be sure, said the doctor. Divers go down. I've been down myself in a diving suit for that matter. But they only go where the sea is shallow. Divers can't go down where it's really deep. What I would like to do is go down to the great depths where it's miles deep. Well, well, I dare say I shall manage it some day. Let me get you another cup of tea. Well, if you insist. The 8th chapter. Are you a good noticer? Just at that moment, Polynesia came into the room and said something to the doctor in bird language. Of course, I did not understand what it was, but the doctor at once put down his knife and fork and left the room. You know, it's an awful shame, said the parrot as soon as the doctor had closed the door. Directly he comes back home, all the animals over the whole countryside get to hearing of it, and every sick cat and mangy rabbit for miles around comes to see him and ask his advice. Now there's a big fat hare outside the back door with a squawking baby. And can she see the doctor, please? Thinks it's going to have convulsions. Stupid little thing's probably been eating deadly nightshade again, I suppose. The animals are so inconsiderate at times, especially the mothers. They come round and call the doctor away from his meals and wake him out of bed at all hours of the night. I don't know how he stands it, really I don't. Why, the poor man never gets any peace at all. I told him time and again to have special hours for the animals to come, but he is so frightfully kind and considerate, he never refuses to see them if there's anything really wrong with them. He says the urgent cases must be seen at once. Why don't some of the animals go and see the other doctors, I asked. Oh, good gracious, exclaimed the parrot, tossing her head scornfully. Why, there aren't any other animal doctors. Not real doctors. Of course there are those vet persons, to be sure, but bless you, they're no good. You see, they can't understand the animal's language, so how can you expect them to be any use? Imagine yourself or your father going to see the doctor who you could not understand a word you say, nor even tell you in your own language what you must do to get well. Huh, those vets. Sorry. Put the doctor's bacon down by the fire, will you, to keep it hot till he comes back. Do you think I would ever be able to learn the language of animals? I asked, laying the plate on the hearth. Well, that all depends, said Polynesia. Are you clever at lessons? I don't know, I said, feeling rather ashamed. You see, I've never been to school. My father's too poor to send me. Well, said the parrot, I don't suppose you really have missed that much, to judge from what I have seen of schoolboys. But listen, are you a good noticer? Do you notice things well? I mean, for instance, supposing you saw 2 starlings on an apple tree, and you only took one good look at them, would you be able to tell them apart from each other the next time you saw them, the next day? I don't know, I said. I've never tried. Well, that, said Polynesia, brushing some crumbs off the corner of the table with her left foot, that is what you call powers of observation. Noticing the small things about birds and animals. The way they walk, move their heads, flip their wings, the way they sniff the air and twitch their whiskers and wiggle their tails. You have to notice all those little things if you want to learn animal language. For you see, lots of the animals hardly talk at all with their tongues. They use their breath or their tails or their feet instead. That is because many of them, in the olden days when lions and tigers were more plentiful, were afraid to make noise for fear the savage creatures would hear them. Birds, of course, don't care, for they always had wings to fly away with. But that is the first thing to remember. Being a good noticer is terribly important in learning animal language. It sounds pretty difficult, I said.
You'll have to be very patient, said Polynesia. It takes a long time to say even a few words properly, but if you come here often, I'll give you a few lessons myself. And once you get started, you'll be surprised how fast you get on. It would indeed be a good thing if you could learn, because then you could do some of the work for the doctor. I mean the easier work, like bandaging and giving pills. Yes, that's a good idea of mine. 'Twould be a great thing if the poor man could get some help and some rest. It is a scandal the way he works. I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to help him a great deal. That is, if you really are interested in animals.
Oh, I'd love that, I cried. Do you think the doctor would let me?
Certainly, said Polynesia. As soon as you've learned something about doctoring, I'll speak to him of it myself. Shh! I think I hear him coming back. Quick, bring his bacon back up onto the table.
Okay. And with that, we're done for today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and enjoy your tea.